Hi everyone, welcome to our last class in corrections for the spring 2020 semester. Today is Thursday, April 30th. We'll be finishing chapter 10, which is release and reentry and parole. We left off last class on slide 33 or thereabouts, so I want to pick up there, and it may be a little bit of an overlap, but what I want to talk about is lay some foundation for where we're headed today, which is to talk about the three types of conditional release from jail or prison. By that I mean a person is leaving prison or jail, but they are going to be subject to supervision in the community. Three ways that can happen is discretionary parole, which is what we have in Massachusetts, mandatory parole, which exists in some states, and post-release supervision, which is the federal model and followed by maybe 15 states. I can't remember off the top of my head. So those are the three types of parole that we're going to talk about. Before we get there, I just want to finish up this first half reviewing the importance of reentry, whether that reentry happens under any one of those forms, either mandatory parole, discretionary parole, or supervised release. Most offenders are coming back to the community. We would like and we would prefer that they have some supervision in the community. That reentry can be a very hard challenge for a whole variety of reasons. And we certainly want, both for humanitarian reasons, social reasons, and financial reasons, we want people to successfully re-enter, and they need support to do that. Preparation for re-entry begins really in most prisons when the person first arrives. Now, for some, the re-entry process is, quite a distance away. If you're serving a 20 to 30-year sentence, barring either a commutation of sentence or a pardon, they're an exoneration. They're not going to be ready for reentry or the last pieces of reentry for quite some time. But that doesn't mean that the process doesn't begin to help a person who is serving their time to make the best use of the time that they have to serve. So that's teaching new skills. Vocational, educational, teaching new ways of thinking, cognitive and dialectical behavioral therapy, violence prevention, and a whole range of other substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment. So that preparation begins hopefully early, and it is designed to not only get the person ready for release, whenever that's going to be, but also to make better use of their time while they are there. Okay, let's see, where am I going? The reentry process accelerates, person moves closer either to their wrap-up date or to their parole eligibility date in a state like Massachusetts that has discretionary parole, or in states that have mandatory parole. It would be that person, moves closer to that parole date, then it's important that someone be paying close attention to getting the person ready to be leaving. So this is a continuum of reentry. The person enters under the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. They do assessments at the beginning, both for internal classification and external classification. And then reclassification along the way to get when someone is ready for pre-release. The programming will change a little bit, and we'll look at some of the things that are part of teaching people how to get a job, more intensive, focused attention to how to get a job, how to fill out an application, how to respond to questions about a conviction, then reentry presentations that are workshop-like things, again, try and provide offenders who are nearing the completion of their incarcerated time and hopefully successfully joining the community. Those reentry things, those issues that are part of the workshops, the release committee, and the reentry presentations include housing, how to find housing, medical, getting access to medical care, which often requires, medical insurance through Mass Health, usually, access to mental health services, again, requiring insurance through Mass Health, employment, victim and public safety notification. So many offenders do have are sentenced on victim crimes, and those victims have to be notified whenever that person is either moving to a different facility or entering the community in substance abuse treatment support. There are two major providers of reentry services. One is called Regional Reentry Centers, which are dotted throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I'll point out the highlights of those. And then there are residential treatment programs. Those are typically like halfway houses that an offender would step down to. They are not locked in. They are in the community. They are, however, designed to provide structure and support to help people continue their staying clean and sober. There may be some that are also function as dual diagnosis programs, which is both mental health and alcohol or other substances. Okay, let's see. The Boston School of Reentry is a pre-release program, which I'm going to highlight here. It is in Boston, as the name applies, but it is open to eligible state prison inmates. There are far more eligible and very interested state prison inmates in the Boston Pre-Center than there are available beds. They can house 140 inmates at a time. They are more like a college dormitory. Functions a lot more like the prisons that you might see in another country. And this is pre-release, so it's minimum security. The focus there is on educational skills, making sure that people can read and write, that they not only have adult basic education, reading and writing, hopefully at least a high school diploma or equivalency, and ideally would have been working on postgraduate college credit. Professional skills, certifications, maybe looking for trades that the person would be shown an interest in, and critical reasoning skills, better decision making. Poor decision making is a significant risk factor for recidivism. No surprise to that. Okay, let's see. So this is just a description of the pre-release center, the Boston Pre-Release Center. To be eligible to go, an inmate has to be within 18 months of parole eligibility. They have to be approved as appropriate at low level. This is a perimeter, but non-secure boundary, meaning there's no physical barriers to movement and interaction with the others. So it really is a transition back into the community. With supervision and structure and support, the headmaster, or the person who was the headmaster, captured the intention very well when he said we're trying to get the Boston Pre-Release Center to emulate or look like a true academic environment in the traditional sense of the word, so more like being in college than being in prison. And that's the model is based on. Okay. This is a 8-minute video, which I'm not going to show because I didn't get it posted up already. And that's that is my thought. It does a great job of outlining all of the benefits and the high praise that the people who are graduates of the Boston Pre-Release Center have high acclaim for the time that they spent here and the skills that they acquired. I know I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on the realities, the barriers that face people who are returning from incarceration. It is likened to being shot out of a cannon naked and blindfolded into a brick wall. So despite attempts to get people ready to re-enter, particularly for folks who have served fairly lengthy sentences, it is a frightening experience. So housing, employment, how to have relationships that are appropriate for social, non-criminal relationships with families and friends, how to access drug and alcohol treatment, education, health care, and how to avoid recidivating, and if the person is being released on parole, how to abide by conditions of the parole conditions, which I'm going to cover shortly. Keeping away from criminal associates will be important, but that is easier said than done when someone goes back to a community with people that they know are people who are still crime involved. It can be a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Bear in mind that people who are paroled, or even those who are released from prison or jail, having completed these sentences, meaning they are on unconditional release, they're not on parole. They're given $25 to $100 and said, good luck, that's it, that's all they get. They might, if they're on medications, psychotropic medications, they may get a 30-day supply. But when that's gone, if they have not had the opportunities and the support and the structure to make connections to the community to access health care, including prescription medication, which is so important in managing their physical or mental health, then things are not going to go well. Okay. All right. So, establishing structure and stability, choosing supportive relationships, not criminal buddies, and connecting to social services and community agencies. Think about how overwhelmed you are at this point in the semester trying to figure out, how am I going to get through the semester? And what am I going to take courses in the fall for those of you who are returning and not graduating? Think if you had to worry about all of these other things, with the consequences being that if you failed, you could quite likely wind up back behind bars, the very place that you don't want to go. Okay. The first 6 months of release, both for people who are released without conditions of release, they wrap up their sentence, they're let go because they weren't parole eligible or they didn't get parole, or for people who are released off parole. Those first 6 months are critical. You remember from the recidivism data, certainly the first 6 months through theory, that's when the biggest numbers of either technical violations or new arrest violations occur. So there is if the person is being released on parole, there is a parole officer assigned, and hopefully the supports will be there. Among the additional consequences of having a criminal record in the community is something called collateral consequences. Beyond just having a conviction and having freedom and liberty taken away, people who have a criminal conviction are, in most states, ineligible for employment, even as a transportation, or a taxi driver, or an Uber driver, or driving an MBTA bus for 10 years. Permanent ineligibility for employment in any of the gaming industries. So in some communities, maybe now also here in Massachusetts, thanks to Encore, when it's open, which I'm sure it will reopen, they're ineligible for employment for life in some states. Ineligible, obviously, for employment as a police officer, that is for sure. State police, local police, can't serve as a manager of a living facility, and importantly, ineligible for public housing, which means his mom or girlfriend or cousin or grandma is in public housing, and they're willing to let you come with them. You can't do that, which puts them in risk of them losing their house, and you certainly don't want that to happen. Okay, there are a number of good videos in these lectures as the time permits you to watch them. There are, it almost feels like, and the question barely can be asked, are parolees really sentenced to fail? It's not the intention, but the unintended consequence of expecting really what might be unrealistic, particularly with individuals who have relapsing mental health and or substance abuse issues. Okay, in Massachusetts we have a set of programs, one program called Transitional Treatment, which is intensive, high levels of reentry care and planning that lasts for about 90 days, and that is provided through the Parole Board and is available both to individuals who do receive parole and the parole officers and the regional community correction centers, reentry centers, do provide services to individuals who were released without condition because they need help navigating this complex network of needs that they have. In Massachusetts, the LSCMI risk needs assessment is what is used to determine the level of supervision that a person needs if they're being released under conditions of release of parole. And you can see here, this is from Massachusetts, 2018, only 8% of the people that were released on parole rated on a risk needs assessment as very low risk for recidivism. Less than 1% rated very high risk of recidivism, most in the low to medium risk range. In 2018, there were 700, just under 800 people, Massachusetts prisoners released prior to completing their sentences on parole. Another program which is available is called the Massachusetts Reentry Navigator program, and this is, again, a parole board program which is designed to help connect people with relapsing or drug and alcohol histories through this Navigator program, and it seeks to match individuals with both their substance or their primary substance abuse and also where they are physically located. So you can see 40% of the releasees in 2017 from Massachusetts State Prison were identified as heroin addicted or opioid addicted, and alcohol was the next highest followed by marijuana, cocaine, and then dropping down. Why wouldn't they be prescription opioid users? Well, probably by the time they're out of prison, no longer, or they may have been in prison so long that they weren't part of the opioid epidemic that you certainly can consider over the past okay. Sheriff's departments might offer reentry programs. These regional reentry centers are hugely important. They are the front line of helping people successfully access employment, mental health, substance abuse, vocational training, housing, and family relationships. Okay, so that's where we're going to end on part 1. We're now going to go to part 2. Does anyone have any questions? No? Not. Alright, here we go. This is good. This is perfect. So here we are in part 2. A snapshot of parole today. In the United States, about 840,000 people on parole in the year 2018. And parole can be, parole is one form of correctional supervision. We're going to talk about the 3 different types of conditional release from prison. Some are called parole and some are not. And they look an awful lot alike, and it is confusing, and I'll do the best I can to explain it to you. Okay. We have people, for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to mandatory minimum sentences, longer sentences, parole eligibility that's been either, some states have eradicated parole. There is no parole. People serve the offenses, or pretty much up to at least 67% to 85% of it before they're released. And so we have a lot of, it's a changed population from what it used to be in terms of who's out on parole. There were, in 2016, just about that 840,000 that you saw on the IRAC earlier. Who gets paroled, at least in 2016, and this is based upon prisons only, federal and state prisons, it doesn't include jail inmates. About of those 840,000, of the jail, the prison inmates, federal or state, that are state inmates, federal inmates are never on parole. They are supervised, but they're not on parole. They're on something called mandatory supervised release. But of those people that are on parole, you can see 1 in 3 were convicted of a violent crime, a little bit more than 1 in 3 of a drug offense, followed by property crime, a bunch of other things that don't fall into one of those 3 categories, and weapons. So there's a potpourri, but certainly people convicted of violent crimes can be and are eligible and make up about a third of the entire parole population. Okay, so 3 types of conditional release from jail or prison: discretionary parole, mandatory parole, mandatory post-release supervision. And that's what we're going to cover. Massachusetts is one of a number of states that has discretionary parole. A person is eligible for parole, doesn't mean they're going to get parole. Parole eligibility is determined in Massachusetts based upon the length of the person's sentence in either state prison or in jail. And that's basically what the formula is in other states, although the calculation may be a little bit different. Mandatory parole, or discretionary, means if you are eligible or when you are eligible. you go before the parole board and you ask the parole board to grant you the conditional release parole, allowing you to complete your sentence in the community rather than behind bars. It is discretionary because the parole board doesn't have to grant parole. They certainly have the right to deny parole, and they do so frequently. The mandatory parole system that exists in a number of states it involves determinate sentences, a fixed amount of time, and a person, unless he or she has institutional misconduct or is extremely dangerous and ineligible, the person will be released after serving a certain percentage of their sentence. As I said, typically 85%, in a few jurisdictions it may be 67%. So long as you have no institutional misconduct, you're not convicted of a crime that is parole ineligible, you're not deemed to be too high a risk to public safety, then you're guaranteed parole after you complete X amount of time. The third type of supervision in the community post-release from incarceration is called mandatory post-release supervision. It is a different name for what really works very much like parole. Mandatory post-release supervision was adopted first by the federal government when it abandoned parole. There's no more federal parole. Several states follow the federal government and have what's called mandatory post-release supervision. By that, the individual gets a determinate sentence. So let's say it's in a state that has mandatory post-release supervision. At the time of sentencing, the judge sentences the person to, let's say, 5 years in state prison. That person is going to serve all 5 years. But instead of just walking away with no conditions of release, they're not only going to serve the sentence of it, which means they're not getting out early, so it's not parole, but they are going to be supervised once they are released. And at the time of sentencing, in most jurisdictions, especially the federal jurisdiction, in all federal cases, sentences are determinate sentence with at about 90+% of all federal cases, the judge at the time of sentencing determines how long this post-release supervision is going to last. So it functions like parole because the person is under conditions of release and can be, if they violate the conditions of release, can be returned to an incarcerated setting. But it's not parole because parole only applies when someone is released from prison or jail prior to completing their sentence. Okay, so as mentioned, parole was abolished by in all federal criminal cases in November of 1987 during the real height of the Get Tough on Crime era. Also part of that same era of longer periods of incarceration, the federal government, Congress passed a law requiring truth in sentencing, requiring offenders to serve longer periods of time before they could be released. And in addition, what you should know, and I'll cover this in a moment, is every state and federal prisoners are entitled to the opportunity, not the guarantee, to earn credits or days off their sentence. And under the federal, under the current system, unless it's changed since the last time I checked, which I don't believe it has, individuals were entitled to 47 days per year for good time credit. In other words, if they didn't do anything wrong, if they didn't get any disciplinary reports, they could get Okay. When a person is released from federal prison, either mandatory supervised release or if released with mandatory supervised release, they are supervised by the U.S. Department of Probation and Pretrial Services. There's no federal parole officer any longer since parole was abolished. So the example in a federal case, let's say an armed robbery, is the statute violation. Maximum penalty under federal law for violation of this federal criminal statute is 25 years in prison and up to $25,000 fine and up to 5 years of supervised release following release from prison. In 2010, there were almost 100% of all releases from prison carried with them supervised release. Following the federal abandonment of parole as representing or symbolically representing not tapping up on crime, states also abolished parole and adopted in its place 16 states now have determinate sentencing and mandatory supervised following the federal law. So the person isn't on parole because they have to do their full sentence in state prison, but they are also supervised under conditions of release once they are supervised. The remaining states, 34, have either discretionary or mandatory. Which this bar graph shows you for the period 1980 to 2004. With the abandonment of parole and the move towards either mandatory parole, mandatory parole doesn't even, I'm sorry, it does show it. Mandatory parole means you have to serve a longer probation sentence before you are, so this is you get sentenced, you have to serve 85% of it, or at least in every state that I know of, at least 67%. And that mandatory parole replaced the discretionary parole in those states that decided to keep parole. The next slide is going to show you, this shows you discretionary parole going down. So Massachusetts was among a declining number of states, or at least among a declining number of states measured by released prisoners. Mandatory post-release supervision grew pretty dramatically in Massachusetts. Okay, so 3 ways people are released from prison on conditions of release. In other words, you're not just free to go. You have to comply with the parole or release contract. Discretionary parole, mandatory parole up to serving that 67 to 85%, or mandatory supervised release, which is used in the federal prison. There are people who do get released from prison and federal prison, less likely, but some state prisoners in every state are released unsupervised. They complete or they wrap up their sentence, and they're under no, they paid their debt, they completed their sentence, they are not, they can't double dip, so they are free to go without conditions. Those truth in sentencing laws that I mentioned, just so you can have some historical background. 1996, the average amount of time people spent in prison, the average was 30 months. About 44% of the sentence. So they get a sentence of maybe 6 to 7 years, but they would be out in 5 years or less. And that caused public outrage. So in 1993, Congress passed truth in sentencing law that requires completion of 85% of a sentence for federal now they did away with even the 85% and moved to mandatory supervised release after completing the full. You can see from this, which is 1993, compared to post-truth and sentencing law. Georgia, people used to spend they'd get sentenced, they'd only serve less than half, or about half of their sentence before they were paroled. Today, they serve 100%. Washington State had pretty high completion rate, 76%. They increased it to 85%. Illinois, less than half, increased it to 85%. Ohio went from serving about a quarter of the time of the sentence and increased it to nearly 100%. New Jersey, the same. Pennsylvania, the same. So you can see truth in sentencing made a dramatic difference in the length of time that people were serving their sentence. Parole eligibility. Mandatory parole eligibility is determined simply as a mathematical formula. It is 85% of your sentence. If you haven't screwed up, you don't have any institutional misconduct, you haven't been deemed too dangerous to participate, you're going to get released. Discretionary parole is based upon a percentage of the sentence. I'm going to show you that formula in a minute. And then in discretionary parole states such as Massachusetts and other states that have mandatory parole, there are certain offenses that are parole ineligible. So we have life without possibility of parole sentences in Massachusetts for first-degree murder. And I'll talk a little bit more about that very shortly. Parole eligibility in Massachusetts, which is a discretionary parole state, is based upon, first of all discretionary parole systems have indeterminate sentences. The sentence is a range of time, and the reason is for parole, discretionary parole, is to incentivize people to obey the prison rules, to do their time and do it smart, so that they are eligible to get rewarded and released prior to the completion of the sentence. In Massachusetts, parole eligibility for state prison is the low end of the sentence, so it's always an indeterminate sentence, less good time credit for participating in vocational, educational, and treatment programs, and that can be that now actually been raised to 15 days a month, which amounts to 15 times 12, 150, let's say. So that's a fair amount of time that can be shaved off a person's sentence from that 9 years. So it's 9 years minus the time credits that they have earned. There are second-degree murder sentences carry life with parole eligibility between 15 and 25. So life without possibility of parole, first-degree murder, no parole eligibility. Most offenders, those except for serving life without possibility of parole on first, or life with eligibility 15 to 25 on second-degree murder. Everyone else is parole eligible with some notable exceptions, like mandatory minimum sentences, which I'll talk about. Everyone else is eligible at the low end of that indeterminate sentence, less any earned good time credit, which can be significant because it involves a lot of Okay, how does parole work? This was a really awful, terrible, stupid, alcohol-fueled event at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. 3 students in a frat house were killed in a stupid game. And we set the room on fire where Joseph Rquires and Sean Ryan. They were indicted 3 years later. Neither one of them had criminal history. They pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter and were sentenced to 5 years in prison. They were parole eligible under then New Jersey law after serving 16 months of that 5-year sentence. I'm not going to show you I won't show you the sentence page. It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. So if you knew somebody that they were drunk and was stupid in college and purposely lit a building on fire and 3 people died as a result, and they wound up with a 5-year sentence, would you think that they should be able to leave prison after 16 months as opposed to 60 months? 5 times 12 is 60. 16 months is a whole lot short of 0. They were parole eligible. They were denied parole until Sean Ryan was paroled after serving 3 years and 4 months on his 5-year sentence, and then was on parole for 8 months post-release. Rquires was close to wrapping up his sentence. He decided not to be paroled and just to finish out his time. He only had left. Decided to finish out his time so that when he was released from prison, he wasn't under any conditions of release. Obviously, if he got rearrested, he'd have to face the consequences of the new arrest. But they wouldn't even have any conditions such as main drug and alcohol free report to probation. Parole officer in that. Okay, parole eligibility. If a person is granted parole, they must comply with the standard of the special conditions of parole. I'll show you what those are in Massachusetts. And like probation, a person who's on parole, either mandatory parole in those states, the habit, or discretionary parole in Massachusetts, or individuals who are on mandatory supervised release, like in federal crime, the release can be withdrawn and the person can be incarcerated for violation of the conditional release. Okay, so in Massachusetts, first-degree murder, no eligibility for parole ever. Second degree, eligible after 15 to 25 years. Fewer than 20% of the individuals who apply for parole on second-degree murder charges are released after that low-end number. So many serve much longer. Again, eligible doesn't mean you're going to get it. You're not even eligible to seek parole on a second-degree murder case until you have served 15 years minus good time credit, or up to 25 years, and that's determined by the judge. Okay. Some offenders, although this is changing, are not eligible until they serve the minimum mandatory amount. So that is changing, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it also varies by offenses within jurisdiction. There are special rules regarding parole eligibility of individuals who were between the ages of 14 and not yet 18 years old at the time of the murder. I'm going to hold you responsible for that. If a person serving second-degree murder is eligible for parole, and if it's not, they must be allowed a rehearing no later than 5 years from that time, so they can come up again in 5 years. The rule with regard to individuals who are serving sentences that are parole eligible, if they are denied parole at the first parole hearing, they have a right to a rehearing to come back to the parole board within a year. As I mentioned, there are minimum mandatory sentences that might make certain people, including habitual offenders, three-structure outlaw, ineligible for parole until they have reached a minimum. In order to encourage offenders to work towards improvement, changes in attitude, changes in behavior, getting ready to be law-abiding citizens, and certainly helping control institutional, it's easier to control an institution where people are motivated to do the right thing rather than looking to do the wrong thing. And parole is one high incentive motivation, and then good time credit now in state prison can be earned up to 15 days per month and up to another 90 days, so 3 lunch days after sentence for completion of certain recidivism reduction programs on drugs, alcohol, employment. But as we already saw in our coverage in Chapter 7, 8, and 9, the demand and the interest in those programs, including certainly the ones that are eligible for 90-day reduction in sentence, demand the need, the people who qualify for are far greater than the resources are available to deliver them. Okay. All right, so how does this work? In Massachusetts, it's discretionary parole. It's always for state prison sentences, an indeterminate sentence. Eligibility for parole, if it's not a mandatory minimum offense, is lowest number minus good time credits that they can earn. So let's assume 5 years, someone set 7 to 10. They would be eligible for parole 7 years minus, let's say they had maxed out and they had 120 days a year for the past 5 years, 600 days. All right, 7 years is 2,555 days. They get 600 days off of that. That means they would be eligible for parole after serving 1,955 days for 5 years and 127 days on a 7 to 10 year sentence. So you can see that those good time credits, those encouragement of participation in programming and avoiding disciplinary reports do get rewarded with, and sometimes the number of credits is okay. In Massachusetts, House of Corrections sentences are determinate. They're always a fixed amount of time, such as 18 months in the House of Corrections or 2 years in the House of Corrections. The rule on eligibility for Massachusetts parole eligibility on House of Corrections sentences is 1/2 the amount of time served less earned good time credit. So on an 18-month sentence, a person would be parole eligible after 9 months less any earned good time. The opportunities to earn credit is smaller number of credits available and fewer number of credits available in House of Corrections sentences, and there's no completion credits that can be earned. So it's just, I believe it's, I have to, I don't want to say that it is changed, so I don't want to try and remember, because I can't off the top of my head. All right, and then if somebody's serving concurrent sentences, sentences in the House of Corrections, for example, 2.5 years on one and 2 years on the other, The rule is you're parole eligible after 2 years, even though the sentence was before now. Less good time for that. So there's all these crazy rules, but they matter. They matter a lot to offenders. They're important information to know. Bear in mind this report that we looked at started 2 classes ago. The number of inmates, this is just state prison inmates, who are waiting on a wait list. They are eligible. Some of them have already been given conditional parole so long as they complete one of these programs, but they can't complete them because the wait list is so long. And so this same report uncovered the fact that in Massachusetts state prison, there were many offenders who were really staying in prison 200 extra days just in order to get to the top of the wait list to complete one or more of these programs to then be eligible for parole. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. It's upside down, but in any event, that's the reality. The term of parole in Massachusetts is the difference between the amount of time served and the amount of time left on your sentence. So, on a state prison sentence, 20 to 30 years, if the offender is granted parole at the earliest date, which would be 20 years less good time credits, or completion credits, which I'll talk about. Let's say what am I doing? Yeah, I'm trying to read at the same time to test it. Sorry. So they would be eligible possibly for parole if I'm sorry, 20 to 30 years. I'm not about calculating the good time credit. Whatever they are, they are. Once they get out, they would have the difference between 30 years, the length of the sentence, 20 minus the good time credits, or approximately 10 years to be on probation. Sorry, on parole. It's been a long day. Again, a long day. All right, any questions? You guys have like a captive audience. Unbelievable. Okay. So the length of the term of parole is dependent upon the system under which, whether it was mandatory or discretionary, and can be as few as 6 months to sometimes more than 7 years or longer. Although the best practice now recognizing that it is not probably a good idea to keep someone on parole for a very long time. There needs to come a point at which they are conducting themselves appropriately, and 7 years would be a very long time. We used to have lifetime parole in Massachusetts for certain sex offenders, and the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled that that was unconstitutional under our state constitution. So there is no longer lifetime parole for sex. There are other pretty draconian measures that lifetime parole is one of them. Check my notes, make sure I'm covering what I want to cover and not missing something. Okay, so this statute was repealed. There is no longer lifetime parole in Massachusetts. Okay, conditions of parole. Like issues, parole can have standard or special conditions. These are examples of conditions of parole from other states, and for reasons that I am confused by, the notes that I want are not easy. Hang on one second. apologize for the delay. These were notes that were lost and reconstructed through scanning and PDFs, and I cleaned it up, and it looks like I didn't grab the cleaned up version, so that's what I'm going for right now. Here, Agent. How are you guys doing, anyway? No one's going to answer. You're good. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Is everyone else good? Rachel, Elizabeth, Megan, somebody else is here.
I'm hanging in there.
Hanging in there. Peter's with us as well. Good.
I'm good too.
Okay. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Can you believe this is our last class?
It actually kind of flew by.
It did kind of fly by. This is my last class. I'm not coming back. So this will be the last class I teach at this one. And you will have been there. Think about that. I'm so sorry this is taking so long to load. You know what? I'm not going to hold you. Let's do this. I am going to open the quiz. The last quiz, which is quiz number 10, is on chapter 10. You all have a textbook. You all have access to my lecture notes. I'm going to open it tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I'll send you an announcement to that effect. And it will be due on Monday evening, May 4th at 11:59. If you have problems, if you need a further extension, if you need an extension, let me know, okay? I need all of the work done by May 6th. If there's a problem, I need to know about it before then, and that's why I'm setting May 4th as the date. Okay. Questions, anybody?
Yeah, are we going to have a final for this class?
No, there is no final. Nope, this is it.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah, thanks, Mama. That, hopefully, it's not a surprise. I did announce it when we did the conversion from on the ground to online, moving towards just quizzes. They were much more comprehensive quizzes, but they were only one chapter at a time. And so that was the decision that I made at the time, and I'm not going to go back on that. So this is it. This is your last graded item for this course. And you are welcome. Any questions, comments, or I'm going to shut off